Hello. We hope everyone is doing well. I am Nelson Santana, and here we have, and we're both co-founders of ESENDOM as well as editors of ESENDOM. And we decided to just, on the backdrop of September 11, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we decided to just have a very candid, casual conversation regarding the 20th anniversary, reflecting back on that day and basically what this means for us. And yeah, so we're there's really no introduction per se. And yeah, we're just Emmanuel Espinal and I are just who are real life compadres. We're just going to talk about this event, right? So let's start off with this with the very first question. Do you remember where you were on the tragic day of September 11th?
Yes, I remember the 11th day of September of 2001 very vividly. It was one of those normal days for me as a college student, where I was in a conference room of about 300 students, I would say, taking Psychology 101. Um, and I remember it vividly because um, of the circumstances of that day, where on a normal day we would all sit together in terms of a group of students that we were blocked as freshmen for the same classes. Um, and I had my own little group of about 5 or 6 people, and we had assigned ourselves certain seats in the class. Um, and we would all meet up in that section. I remember and I recall that I was like about the third one or fourth one, and only one or two were still missing. I had asked about the sign-in sheet because the class would take attendance within a signing. Um, and I remember that it had not passed around, so we were sitting and waiting for it to come back to us. And a friend of mine, Amit, uh, was one of the last ones to come in, and he was delayed by the train. Um, and then a friend of his uh, had come in late, and he also asked her what had happened to her, and she had said that the trains were being stopped uh, on the lower end of Manhattan coming in to the city because a plane had crashed into one of the towers. And it was something that at first we were like, no, that can't be. We were kind of skeptical because we had not heard anyone else say any of that. And at that point in time, even though there was internet and uh, smartphones were starting to slowly come about, it wasn't like now where we have social media and everything's almost immediate. So the information uh, transfer is quick, and you hear about it almost instantly. Um, so I remember that we were kind of in that situation of not really believing what she was saying, um, but we were kind of in that trance where do we look to see if that information is real? Do we wait a little longer? Um, and then I recall that about 20 minutes in, um, later than that, the sheet had passed by. We were able to sign our attendance, and one of us received uh, a text message where they were asking if we were all okay, um, or specifically one of the students, and it was because they were saying that the second building was hit by a plane, and that's when we sort of organized ourselves and we decided that we would leave the classroom. but to make sure that we didn't uh, make any commotion or stir up uh, the situation, that we would do it one by one, little by little. And we ended up leaving class one by one, and at that time, the VC building at Baruch was brand new, and anyone who went to Baruch at that time understood there were TVs on each and every floor. So we ended up walking towards the escalators, um, and there were TVs right around there, and we were able to see the first images of the plane crashing, and that's when we understood the magnitude of the situation, and that this was real and it was actually happening.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And it's interesting. I believe at the time we had not yet met. We met in 2003, I believe, if I recall correctly, right? So it's interesting. I too remember that day. There was that Baruch connection. We met while we were students at Baruch, right, in 2003, and in Professor Hill's class, Professor Lourdes Hill's class. But that's the same day. So as this is happening, you're going through this. I am at home getting ready to go to school, to go to Baruch. And I hear this. Well, not that I hear, but I casually had the TV on, I had the television on, and I hear this news. Oh, okay. There was this plane just again casually just crashed into a tower, one of the World Trade Center, crashed into a building. And I'm just getting ready to go to school, but I'm like, this is weird. Like, of course I've never seen this happen in my lifetime, let's say. So, and I remember that my mother is coming in as well during this time. So I'm preparing. I believe I was getting ready to go to music class, if I recall correctly. I do not remember which class per se, but I know it was nine something or eight something in the morning, nine something in the morning around there. And I'm just getting ready, trying to rush. And then several minutes later, obviously, the second plane crashes. And then again, the image, they keep playing the image, which had psychological effect, right, on people as well, eventually, because there was this about 2 week period that's all they would basically just keep replaying practically all the news channels. But then I'm like, I'm concerned. And my mother looks at me and she's like, it's like we looked at each other. I don't recall like the exact words. They were very minimal, but I know that we looked at each other. Basically, we looked into each other's eyes, and we basically said, it's everything's gonna be all right. But of course, we know that something is happening. Something strange is happening, right? And we just couldn't express it or even know what we were talking about. It was just shock. It was something shocking. Uh, is this going to be the start of a war? Are we going to continue to get attacked, bombarded? What is happening? And I will leave it there. And well, needless to say, of course, I did not go to school that day. I stayed in Brooklyn. I stayed home. I mean, I did go out, and I guess in the next questions we will discuss this a little bit further, but I guess this leads us to the next question, which you kind of touched on. I do not know if you want to expand on it, but can you walk us through, or can you describe what the feeling was like in New York City in the immediate aftermath?
I would first have to explain a little bit of what happened in the aftermath of actually filing out of the class and seeing the images for the first time. We ended up leaving the school completely, walking out on the street, and everything was pretty much normal. Normal traffic, people just walking quietly about their business in starting their own day. Um, but we were kind of numb. We definitely did not know what was really happening. Just as you explained with your mom, we were all feeling things were not the same, but there was no immediate instinct as to what to do, what not to do. Um, and we started just walking. Normally, what we used to do, since uh, that class afforded us like around a 3 hour leeway, what we used to do was walk down to Soho Billiards um, from time to time and like sort of play a couple of games of pool and kind of be in our own uh, world until we had to go back to class. On that day, what we ended up doing was first walking around 23rd Street, and then when we got to Broadway and 23rd, we just decided to head south. Um, and then what ended up happening was we all decided heading south that we would go to Soho Billiards and wait things out because within that time frame, it took us like about an hour and a half to kind of move around a little bit because we were all still in our headspace. And by that time, things quickly started kind of shutting down in terms of uh, the subway because they were already moving to see what was happening because even the news that was coming out, they were completely still not understanding the whole aspect as to uh, what was the grand scheme of it. Uh, Also, within that time frame, the whole situation in Washington was changing, and also the situation with Pennsylvania was transpiring with the other flight, and all of that prompted the city to kind of start shutting down. So we weren't able to really take the trains back home. Uh, and so we decided we might as well go to Soho if it's still open until it stays open, and then we'll figure what we would do from there on. Um, when we got there, um, we kind of just said, okay, let's have something to eat. But because by that time it was about lunchtime, we decided to get something to eat. We started playing a couple of hands of pool, and we really didn't have any idea what we were going to do. So that actually extended itself all the way till about, I would say, 6 ish when the trains were back up and running. And then uh, one by one, we started kind of dispersing. I was actually the last one to leave, and I recall try to come back home, and everything was so empty by that time. Things were kind of calmed down, and it was eerie. The city seemed off. Um, and in terms of the immediate aftermath, um, I could say that it was very somber. The It was like something heavy was upon all of us within the city. And every day it was a different uh, situation in school as the the educational system understood that it was a heavy burden for most of the students, um, and they were looking to make that part of the curriculum the first couple of weeks right after it happened, so that it would be sort of uh, a bit of a therapeutical way of expressing ourselves as students. Um, so that's really what I can remember as the immediate aftermath. It was like everything was heavy. It felt heavy, um, and definitely a lot of the students were talking about anecdotal stories that they were hearing from their own neighborhood, people that had lost family members. A lot of that was going on, and in between, obviously, kind of everybody trying to find their footing back again because the event actually hit everybody in different ways, but people were just trying to cope.
Well, thank you for sharing. I too remember that particular. I mean, it's hard to it's one of those days that will forever, I think, live with all of us, because it was just such a unique day, and hopefully something that we will never again experience during our lifetime. I remember that day, for example. At some point, my mother and I, we went out. I really do not recall what was happening or why we did this, but we went outside. I know that my father was working, so he came out of work, and all of us met together on, I believe, Fifth Avenue. Now, I do not recall. I don't think we took public transportation, but what I do recall is seeing this sea of people in the streets, right? So the Fifth Avenue bus, uh, you see nothing but people. There were just so many people in the streets. I mean, cars couldn't move. If they did, it was very little movement. The bus couldn't move. I mean, it was idle. It would stay idle for minutes. You just couldn't move. There were just so many people. Again, people were many people walked home. They crossed, I believe, bridges, if I'm not mistaken. But people had to walk home if they could walk home. Whether it was a mile, two, three, several miles. I remember just again the sea of people, because there practically was, I think public transportation was non-existent. I
Yes.
believe it was all shut down, if I recall correctly. I
Yeah.
mean, eventually it got started, but I do remember just, people unable to get on the bus. And if you did see the bus, it was jam packed, but then the bus couldn't move because people were walking in the streets. So fortunately for me, I guess I was home when it happened. I was lucky, right? Because as we know, there were many people who just they lost their lives on that day. Not just the people that were inside the multiple buildings, not just two, multiple buildings, but also the folks, the dust and the debris that just fell on people, etc. And so that was the immediate impact. And something that I remember is, as again, as the buildings collapsed, I live in Brooklyn, right? I live in an area that's right, the Park Slope, Red Hook, Sunset Park area. And for several weeks, all the debris that fell, right, as the when the buildings collapsed, I mean, it was an explosion. You had all this debris just go throughout Brooklyn or across the river, just falling. I remember going to the actual Sunset Park, not, the Sunset Park, the actual park, but which is inside the neighborhood of Sunset Park. And paper were just papers, spent days traveling there, debris, and you could see it. It would just fall, not for one day, not for an hour, but for multiple days, just travel that way and just fall. And whether it was Red Hook as well, you could see the debris going there for days. And there were days when I would walk alongside, there's this we have Home Depot and Jetro. It's kind of Third Avenue. It's a weird walk, but it's alongside the BQE. And I remember there would be several days where uh, garbage, not the typical garbage truck, but there were these huge trucks that had debris, had dust, had dirt on them. And I recall, now again, perhaps it was my mind playing a trick on me. I don't think it was my mind playing a trick on me, but I remember seeing boots and possibly arms and legs. It just, again, I would see it from a distance walking by these multiple trucks. I don't know, 9, 10, maybe more than a dozen trucks back to back to back, because the DOT, Department of Transport, I forget the name, but they have like a location there for debris, for stuff. And so alongside, again, going to Jetro, from Red Hook, that little bridge that's there, the Gowanus, to uh, Home Depot, that Jetro area, there were these trucks there. And again, they collected a lot of the I don't want to say the word garbage, but a lot of the debris result that resulted from that. And again, I'm positive that there were even human remains there, right? And it was just like wow, just so seeing the paper for weeks just piling up in Sunset Park, debris going to Sunset Park, other parts of Brooklyn. Excuse me. So again, this happened in Lower Manhattan, but even in, I mean, these buildings were so tall, and again, there were other buildings as well, and the debris just carried on, and I mean, immediately this was something. Again, who could have imagined something like this? This is the type of thing that, or of event that one would read in history books when we study history, and it was like wow, just so impactful. It's You used a word earlier, numb. I was numb, and I'm sure many of us were just numb from this experience. That was the part of the immediate reaction, the immediate impact. And I remember that New York City was kind of paralyzed, right? Was paralyzed. uh they halted all major live events. We're big baseball fans. The baseball games were halted. I remember the Yankees. Unfortunately, that's my favorite team, but they lost the World Series to Arizona. 7 games though. Uh, we lost it. Luis Gonzalez getting that hit on Mariano Rivera, but 2 days later, I believe it was that. So I believe it occurred on a If I recall correctly, it was on a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday class, and then 2 days later, um, there was SmackDown, the SmackDown television show, which is wrestling. I'm a sports entertainment or wrestling fan, and the WWE or WWF then now is the World Wrestling Entertainment. They put on a show, so basically the first large gathering of people, right? We were asked not to gather in public, and yet these folks they did it, and it was one of those kind of feel good moments in that time, and it was something that people needed because again, just that was pure torture watching television because all they would keep playing was the planes crashing, and that just had short term and long term effect on our mental well-being. And we're going to take this now to sort of transition into the next question. And how has this event impacted your life, for example?
Um, well, I would want to add to what you were saying in terms of the psychosis that was being played by the images. It's To me, what I can remember vividly was, yeah, the images over and over of the planes hitting in, the buildings coming down. But there were also sections where they would show those really, really rough moments, seeing people throw themselves from the building because they had no other way of escaping the inferno they were living on the floors. Um, to me is one of the most impactful images for me personally. And then obviously in those days you would hear different storylines, like for example, uh, the 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 first journalist to kind of take a look into what was going on live after being stuck in a van. Sofia La Chapelle, a Dominican journalist who, after getting stuck in a van from the debris, was able to get out with her crew, and they started filming. Um, Obviously, other things kept coming up, different storylines, but to me, that was the most like I would say impactful image of seeing the desperation of certain people and having to jump off an 80th floor um, to their deaths. I mean, they knew what was going to happen. It wasn't like they had any other choice. It's either they felt they were either going to die in the inferno that they were in, or they could have some type of say in how it was going to end, and they decided to try to just throw themselves off a building. I think that was what impacted me most at the time, with those images that were just recurring all the time. Um, and yes, I can remember that TV was kind of hard to deal with for for a good time. Um, and obviously, after living so many other different things uh, that have happened, for example, we're living through one right now with the pandemic. It's sort of those things that you would want it not to be that way, because it does take a toll psychologically. Um, but to get back to the question, how did it impact me? It obviously didn't impact me directly with the loss of any loved one. So in that sense, it was more of uh, understanding that I lived through an event that would be in the history books. Because as a young kid coming up in the educational system of the U.S., you only get to read the historical events of that magnitude, and you don't ever really, as a young child, think you're going to go through something that would come into the history books, or an event of that magnitude that would uh, impact you, because usually those events are not staged in the US. It's usually, you know, the one I can think of is Japan, and the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or the Vietnam War, where uh, the Agent Orange was used. So that type of event you don't ever think will be in your on your own soil where you live. So to me, it impacted me more on that kind of spectrum, that I was able to live through an event that was definitely important, and that would change a lot of the things that I would think as a college student, because that did give me a bigger perspective as to history and how you can impact it, even through small steps. Um, I remember the years right after that, I was able to take some courses that would help shape me as a student. As you stated earlier, the one that we met in, Lourdes Hill, was one of those teachers that created an impact in terms of the history. Um, and the event really shaped me in seeing how historical events uh, change a society, because it did change New York City for sure, and not just aesthetically with the loss of the two buildings, or Ground Zero having to be built over again. Um, it changed us for the better. Things were totally different afterwards. I think we were a bit more empathetic to each other, because New York City is known to be very cut and dry, let's say. Um, People just on their own day to day business. We see things, but we don't see them. Um, People are looking to get from point A to point B without really uh, looking as to what's going on completely. But I remember everything from those times, where it was the idea of, if you see something, say something. So people were more vigilant, people were more empathetic, people were looking to get to know the other person more. Um, and that's without even touching upon uh, the Muslim communities that were impacted. in the city. So we were more empathetic, I would say, um, as New York. That's how the impact that it had on me directly. Um, and obviously, over the years, it definitely is in the back of my mind as to all the changes that did occur and what we're living through present. Because what we're how we reacted to this pandemic in New York City is also, I think, a reflection of what transpired in the city on 9/11.
No, thank you for that personal take and sharing with us. Our the impact, which you touched upon several key elements, moments there, and sort of how it brought out the humanity. One of the immediate impacts, I mean, as a person of color, for me, for instance, it affected me, and it affected many of us. It had prolonged impact that we still have today. The levels of racism certainly increased. Discriminate levels of discrimination. Um, for example, I mean the stop and frisk and the Patriot Act, for example, people getting stopped and having to demonstrate, show documentation, etc. And so there was definitely a high level of that. And uh, anyone who looked a particular way, anyone who looked Middle Eastern, many people, there were, hate crimes certainly went up, um, eh, which is very, very unfortunate because particular groups of people uh, were handcuffed, jailed, imprisoned, torture. I mean, there was torture, folks being sent to Guantanamo Bay, for example. Just, I mean, it just, it shaped, it changed drastically the lives of so many people in so many different ways. And there's just a lot there in terms of how it impacted our lives. I mean, again, I'm one of those people, I was constantly stopped by law enforcement just for walking in the streets when, if you recall correctly, when we would have to take the train several days, weeks later, throughout for years, and someone had a bag, they had to be stopped. There was a lot of policing increased, and I truly believe that it made it worse for, again, people who were people of color at school. I mean, I remember being at Baruch and just getting nasty looks from people, right? Or just on the streets, getting people looking at me, sort of not wanting to be anywhere near me, right? People insulting me, throwing insults, cursing at me, uh, just doing very inhumane things. And letting it be known that I was not, they did not want me near them, or in, whether it was in the same building, the room, whatever it was, to train. Um, and again, as a person of color, I know what discrimination and racism looks like. And this was quantified there. I remember one particular incident, I believe it was the following year or 2 years later. It was literally the day, it was the year that the film with Anthony Hopkins, Red Dragon, and Edward Norton came out. I remember because I was on my way to watch that film, and my brother and I left the house. This was, of course, after it was at night, as we're going to the theater, and we're stopped by the NYPD, and they jump out of the car, and they start screaming, and they stop us and ask for identification. I hand over my college ID, and the guy basically says something along the lines of, I don't care about this, or whatever it was. But basically, the deal was they were looking for someone who had committed a crime. But of course, I truly believe to this day that I was stopped again because of that, right? So due to the events, we were stopped, we were frisked, right? And this happened to many people. We were fortunate in the sense that we were not arrested or anything of that nature. We weren't taken into custody. Again, we did not do anything, but there are many people who have been wrongly accused, right, for committing a crime that they did not commit. And again, this event, the tragic events of 9/11, were used to amplify racism, discrimination. It allowed for the creation of racist policies, racist laws to be enacted, and use it as a weapon to attack, again, people of color, people from the working class, etc. So that's sort of part of that impact, or in a way how it impacted my life. Excuse me. Then another thing, of course, is it's just again the psychological effect, the mental effect, and sort of living at a place where you can actually see the dust, the debris just falling for days, for weeks, and walking by and smelling it in the air. So I know that eventually these places, these advertisements, I would see these advertisements in the subway. Where were you when 9/11 happened? Where were you? Were you impacted? Do you suffer this? Do you suffer that? Were there, you may not realize it, but you might have been affected mentally. You might have been affected physically. Your health might have declined because of the event. And I never went to the doctor for that. And many people, I mean, according to studies, several studies have been conducted. Some people have have gotten cancer or other diseases because of that. Have had nervous breakdowns again because of those images that they would see on the news on a daily basis. And so that's another impact, I would say. And it's just, yeah, just smelling. I mean, the air changed, the smell of the air changed, right? Where we were, at least definitely where I lived, and obviously the people who would walk by ground zero, they can smell something, which wasn't not just weren't just the rubbles and the dust of the buildings, but within that, human remains, right? The bones, blood, the skin of people. And I mean, that is something when you think about it, it just, wow, it's like it gets to you, it's that's something impactful. But before continuing there, let's also, because this ties into the next question, and what do you think is the legacy of 9/11?
Um, very, very interesting question, especially since it is the 20th anniversary, and ironically, uh, we the U.S. has finally left Afghanistan, which was the immediate aftermath of what 9/11 symbolized. Um, and thinking about what the impact could have been in terms of a legacy, I just think it if we really look deep down inside, what it shows is the same missteps that have been happening all throughout history. It's a repetition of the same mistakes, of not understanding the human condition, and it's more of the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, to be kind of cliche. Um, and it's all through violence. It's all through having to uh, break down certain societies for the benefit of another. Um, and literally, that legacy is what is being perpetuated through 9/11 in on on a if if I can say more of my own perspective as to what the legacy it's leaving. Because again, we were talking about the imagery that 9/11 left uh, at that point in time. And now to think of the imagery that is leaving in Afghanistan with people giving their babies to soldiers. That's part of the legacy that will be intertwined with 9/11. because it is the war that it started. Um, so to me, the legacy is within those images. It is also within uh, the construct of what we have been able to kind of shift as a society. Um, and I'm saying that as I was a college student back then, just like you. And I'm pretty sure a lot of that shaped uh, how we thought at the time and how we managed to get through. Um, and definitely to me, that's part of what is being left with 9/11. On top of all the lives that were lost with the event, um, we also have to be cognizant or think of all the lives that were lost afterwards, because that was something that has continued until now. Um, and literally understand that even though those lives have perished, no one has really found a closure to this, because it hasn't finished. Um, it's sort of like one open wound has led to another open wound that continues to just perpetuate itself. Um, and I think what 9/11 really should symbolize is a, a day of reflecting on how we can, uh, step by step, kind of move in a different direction to try to uh, not recreate the same situations, because even though we aren't the actual acting uh, characters within what happens on the grand scale, we can definitely be the ones to be able to uh, work together and not let it uh, perpetuate itself over and over, because it does recur. And it is us as a society that decides if we want to let that happen, if we want to believe the lies again, or do we want to rectify it and call the bluff.
Thank you for that reflection. I think you put it very eloquently, and yeah, I mean, defining the legacy of 9/11. I mean, there's just so much, right? And I believe that throughout the our conversation, we touched on upon some of the different matters. You mentioned the situation in Afghanistan. We discussed the racism and discrimination that came, out of that, and policies such as the Patriot Act that made it easier to sort of, made it easier to discriminate against
Facilitate.
against people of color, etc. And yeah, I mean, September 11, the legacy in part is certainly a day that we will never forget, right? Um, it was an attack. It was a day where we lost many lives. It, I do not like to compare events, so I will not compare it to anything else that happened before, anything that has happened since. It is its own unique um, moments in history, plus everything that came afterward. And it's a very difficult question to answer or try to even to tackle. And I think you summed it up fairly rather nicely. And yeah, I mean, what we can do is, I mean, it's one of those events that having media, having news, being connected to having social media and the television has this positive, but it also is a day that demonstrated how that can also be a negative, right? Just how consuming news or just audiovisual content can be detrimental to our own health. So that is also one of the lessons that we can gather from that. But yes, so it'll be again the 20th anniversary, and we hope that people do take the time to reflect on this day, that tragic event and or events. It's on the legacy of it, and hopefully we can remember and improve our health, our mental being, etc. And yeah, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I think you said it best. It's a day to reflect and uh, try to become better human beings, I would say. That's pretty much it. I think it's a day of reflecting and looking for ways to be better on a day-to-day basis. That's the best we can do.
Agree. And for everyone watching, listening to us, this was a special podcast episode where two of ESENDOM's co-founders and current editors, two of its current editors, just we engaged in a casual conversation about 9/11, just reflecting back on that specific day, September 11th, 2001, and also what the events that have transpired since. But we hope that this conversation um, has some value for you, and we thank you for listening to us. And we hope you continue to visit us at esendom.com, our official website, where we have content on Dominican culture, art, music, scholarship, etc., and news as well. And yeah, we have many, many more interviews. We have a podcast. And yes, and we hope that you continue to consume the contents that we provide and make available to you. So thank you, compadre, for this conversation, and for we worked together to draft the question. So thank you so much for taking the time from your very busy schedule.
Thank you. You're very much more a busybody than I am, and as always, it's a pleasure to be able to work with you and provide something that could be of help for someone out there from our own audience. So thank you all very much.
You're welcome. Well, take care, everyone. Have a good day, Essendon viewers. Hasta luego.